This is episode 2 of the now named podcast, our monthly roundtable featuring yours truly, Hrvoje of Geopolitics and Empire, and my compañeros. Y'all want to introduce yourselves?
I'm Monica Perez of the Monica Perez Show.
I'm Parallel Mike of the Parallel Systems Broadcast and Parallel Mind Podcast.
So, this is something we'll be doing every month, a monthly round table, and give us your feedback. Maybe we'll do it twice a month, and we'll also be doing Q&As for our collective paid supporters and subscribers as well. And so you can check our websites for a notification of that. Later, we'll bring our supporters on this live Q&A and just have a shoot the breeze with them. And we have finally, guys and gals, decided on the name. Cognitive Dissidents, is it?
Yes, sir.
And we got there. I mean, we got some great suggestions. So big thanks to everyone who put them out there. And then we kind of did an old school Soviet style voting where we all disagreed, and we got there. And we got a great logo as well made by Bobby, who's Micah's producer. So big shout out to Bobby for that great logo. Yes. And I hope you guys enjoy it. And we'll see where it takes us.
Yeah, and the logo looks great. I just said we need to change the colors because of what we're about to talk about. And so, I'm in charge this month of the round table, and I'll start with the first sort of topics. And for me, the biggest thing that's happening, especially for all of us, is because we're all Westerners, Americans, Brits, and it's just across the Western world. It's accelerating the tyranny, right? Unbelievable. And I've got some stories here. There's people who are listening to just the audio, but I'm going to pull up on my screen here some of the latest stories. And, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, this morning, he posts, I've interviewed him many times. He was Ronald Reagan's assistant secretary of Treasury. He says, in my lifetime, I have watched the transformation of the Western world, a product of centuries of struggle, into a Gestapo police state. And okay, here we go. The Zoom thing is in my way here. And for me, the biggest thing is what I mentioned last time, that in the month of July, there was a website that did a write-up on me, calling me a Russian agent. Geopolitics and Empire and Hrvoje, Eyes of the Republic. I still haven't responded to it. But then right after that, so that was July 22nd. You get this New York Times piece a month later, August 21st. So New York Times, I call Pentagon Times. It's the CIA Pentagon mouthpiece, just like RT is for the Kremlin. And now you have this saying U.S. investigating Americans who worked with Russian state television. The FBI is raiding homes of Americans. And then it goes on to say somewhere talking about that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence warning that Russia was exploiting witting and unwitting Americans to spread narratives favorable to Putin. And then this morning, this drops from MSNBC on how the Biden administration is going to hit Russia with sanctions for trying to manipulate U.S. opinion ahead of the election. So I'm just going to play this clip real quick.
Breaking news, the Biden administration taking a series of actions to target what they allege are attempts by Russian-backed actors to manipulate public opinion here in the U.S. ahead of the presidential election, according to 2 senior U.S. officials. Joining us now is NBC's Ken Delanian. Ken, what more have we learned?
Jose, this is being described by our sources as a whole-of-government action designed to target Russian propaganda and disinformation aimed at interfering in the 2024 election. It is said to include sanctions by the Treasury Department, law enforcement action by the Justice Department, and one of the focuses is on RT, formerly known as Russia Today, that network of Russian government-funded English-language websites and television platforms that was flagged all the way back in 2017 by the U.S. intelligence community as a vehicle for Russian disinformation and election interference. And at that time, the Justice Department required RT to register as a foreign agent. It remains to be seen exactly what actions the U.S. will take against RT today, but this does appear to represent an escalation in the efforts to try to purge the system of Russian propaganda and disinformation. What's interesting is that, look, the U.S. has been saying all along that not only Russia, but Iran and China, but particularly Russia, has been consistently trying to manipulate American public opinion with disinformation on social media platforms, use of fake accounts, and through RT, through its state-sponsored platforms, as they did in 2016. The difference now is that there are mechanisms in place, particularly on the social media platforms, to try to stop and flag fake accounts before the influence operations spread too widely. So it remains to be seen what impact this Russian disinformation is having. But nonetheless, this is a stance by the Biden administration to say if you're violating U.S. laws and policies, we're going to come after you. And Attorney General Merrick Garland is expected to chair a meeting of the government's election task force today, this afternoon, with FBI Director Chris Wray and other officials, and he may have public comments to make about this effort at that time, Jose.
Breaking.
So it's funny how they have a problem with, Russian-financed English language propaganda, and then they pretend, like Radio Free Liberty, that the Pentagon, NATO, CIA, State Department funded Russian language programming is normal. It's okay, but when anyone else does it, that is propaganda. And so let's just recognize everyone's putting out their own propaganda, and just to continue on that thread, Dmitry Shimes, he's a Russian American. His home was raided by the FBI. Scott Ritter's home was raided by the FBI. Danny Shaw, who's a professor.
Oh, yeah.
He was in Palestine, or he went to some conference on Palestine. And in my hometown, I'm from Chicago, at the O'Hare Airport, he got detained by the FBI and DHS, interrogated. John whistleblowers, I think CIA whistleblower John Kirikow, I think he's of Greek descent. He was on the flight home from Greece going through Canada. He's barred from entering Canada. As soon as he was transiting through Canada, and as soon as he got off the plane, the authorities nabbed him and attempted to intimidate him. Eventually, they let him go. And then you've got in the UK, Sarah Wilkinson, activist arrested at her home. Another guy in the UK sentenced to 16 months in prison for offensive tweets, literally thought crime. In Ireland, a teacher was arrested for denying transgenderism. And even in Croatia, for Croatians who know Severina, she's quite a scandalous pop star character. But the point here was she was going to Serbia, and she was, stopped for a long interrogation by Serbian authorities for her again. I quantify this as thought crime for her position, for political views. So you're seeing this from Serbia to Ireland to UK to the US, all across the West, and then former CIA officer Philip Giraldi, he wrote a piece on the national security state killing free speech, and he was mentioning Tulsi Gabbard. And this is funny. This is an image, if people see, of an airplane ticket in the US where you have 4 S's. That's secondary screening. And he mentions in this article, if I could find it real quick, how Tulsi Gabbard, it says right here that Gabbard is being stalked by the TSA's air marshals, part of the agency's Quiet Skies covert operation targeting suspected threats to aircraft and airports. Those who are under Quiet Skies surveillance have a printed SSSS on their airline boarding tickets, requiring one to be taken aside before boarding for additional screening. Gabbard believes that placing her on the list was clearly an act of political retaliation. And what's funny, last year when I went to the US, I got a 4SS secondary screening here in Mexico before I boarded the plane for the US. And so, and then now we're getting articles, New York Pentagon Times again, just
wow.
The Constitution is dangerous, says New York Times. Another Berkeley Law School dean comes out and says the Constitution is outdated. So, I mean, is there a trend here, folks? Tell me what's going on.
Absolutely. I mean, I have so many things as a response to all of that, but one, I wanted to just, I'll give it over to Mike, but I just noticed when Biden said that Russian tactics, Russian bots interfering with the election. Do you guys remember that the biggest a case of supposed Russian interference was with the Alabama senatorial race? I mean, I doubt you would be following state races from there, but Jeff Sessions became Secretary of State. I feel like Trump pulled him out to put that Alabama race in play. And the Republican, who would be considered far right, whatever, he was going to win, even though he was like a colorful character, kind of a kooky guy. And he was really leading, and he was accused of being a Russian asset, of having fake accounts, and all this Russian bot activity surrounded that race. And it ended up that Doug Jones, the Democrat, won. But it came to light that all of that Russian bot activity, I forget exactly the details of how the Russian bot activity actually did change the outcome of the race. But what it ended up being was it was orchestrated by Reid Hoffman, who was the head of, founded LinkedIn. He had I think it was like New Knowledge or something like that, a think tank that was commissioned by the Senate to do a study on Russian interference in elections. They continue to have that contract, continue to write the report, even though they were the ones responsible for all those bots. It was covered in the New York Times. It was Reid Hoffman apologized. They said it was an experiment. It was part of their research, but it actually changed the outcome of the election. So the only Russian bots I've ever heard of who have actually impacted an election were these American operatives in league with the Senate itself.
Yeah, and we had something similar in the UK with Brexit, which was the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where there was these companies that were trying to influence the election, creating bot campaigns, propaganda campaigns. So again, our biggest influence in the UK when it comes to trying to manipulate and rig elections is from within the UK itself, from UK intelligence. So, one thing that I was thinking about when you said this, Hrvoje, as well, is when they do these things, like, for example, put that out there for you to say, oh, Hrvoje is Russian intelligence, is that potentially for later? So that if they do decide to clamp down on you, there's stuff out there. So if people searched for it, now it's there. It's almost like a sleeper piece of evidence that's going to sit there, not going to be used right away, but later on, if they did decide to clamp down, it's almost like a threat as well. I think it's saying to you, you might be caught under this new a clampdown, because it's not legislation, right? It's all just
harassment.
Right. I mean, that's what they do. They try to, that's why I've been so vehement the past couple of years, especially on these different channels in Telegram, where I get all these Nazi, Hitler, anti-Semites, and most of them are probably feds. And I'm just like, sorry, I have to block you, because they're doing what you just said, parallel, Mike. They're trying to associate you to create a straw man to make this fake image of who they want people to believe that you are, whether it's far right, Russian agent, Chinese agent. There's not that many options these days, and so just one more point on what Mike said with the MSNBC thing. Like, who really believes, the Biden administration, that they're doing this because they're afraid of Russian election meddling? I basically feel that's just the really lame pretext and ruse. And the real goal is what Mike said. It's the same deep state doing this, and they're using Russia as a pretext to take away our freedoms, our freedom of speech.
Have you ever been on RT?
No, I've never.
Have you ever been a guest on RT? Because I think that they also don't like people to get out of the silos. So they want to make sure that you are not willing to cross that line. And I have to say, I was invited on not that channel, but a different country's channel, which would definitely be considered like an enemy of the state. And the only reason I didn't do it, I had the courage to do it. I just thought nobody's a hero here. They just want me to talk shit about my own country. And I'm like, I don't see the point of that. Like, it's kind of obnoxious of me to be like, oh yeah, you're totally right. I mean, and this is not a regime that I would admire myself. So I wasn't going to go on top, support that. But TNT is sometimes accused of being too Putin friendly. So you may be targeted for that, for having been on there. Did you ever hear of that? Are you familiar with that accusation?
My boy was the host, so he's done for.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. That's another thing that's going to target you, I think.
TNT, I recently spoke to some people. There was no, their backers are not Russians, Australian or whatever. So yeah, because they didn't toe the line. I think that's the issue. And last night I watched Mike Benz's, Mike Benz, he's amazing, Foundation for Freedom, I think. That's through him I learned that it was a DHS that took me down from PayPal. We're dealing with this, brave 1984 in the Western world. NATO is this, it's one of the key nodes of world government. It's a totalitarian, crazy military, imperial, globalist structure, NATO, and the Atlantic Council, and the DHS, and 77th Brigade, and INGSOC, UK. It's this blob in the West. This is the core of the satanic, evil world government, and they pretend to be. We're so amazing, and then the rest of the world is evil. I was forgetting my last point. Oh, by the way, I was also invited. I was invited on Iran's Press TV, but they never followed through. I would have been happy to appear, but it's just like you say. I mean, Press TV, RT, they'll tell about the bad things of our governments, and we do the same about theirs, but they won't talk bad about what's really happening. And that's how it works. That's why I think I use RT for that purpose. I'll use some Western media for the purpose of understanding the bad stuff that's happening in Russia. But by no means are we Russian agents for interviewing, Russians or
no, and they focus on, obviously those countries focus on the themes where they have the moral high ground over the people in the US or whatever country you're in. And then you, obviously, if you're a thinking person with integrity, you're like, yes, you have the moral high ground here, but they have their own interests and they're not going to point out their own flaws. But sometimes the people, this is true for Marxism, whatever, there are genuine ideological, like robust ideologies that are different from ours. And people who look at the indigenous people in South America and or even the Middle East, where they have a different conception of who owns resources, like underground resources here. You're supposed to own everything down to the center of the earth and up to the moon. Of course, they don't, because they fly over your place. But that's why a lot of people in Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Texas got rich, because underneath their farms was resources. Now, that's our ideology. But in Venezuela or Egypt or whatever, they may say, well, this canal or this oil is a community resource. I can understand a different ideology. I want to talk to people who genuinely, whether I agree with it or not, who hold an ideology that's different from mine and can justify some of the behaviors that are happening in those countries as a reaction to, outside imposed ideologies. And that doesn't make you supporting the communists. I'd love to talk to a genuine, like an authentic Venezuelan person who says the other side of the story, whether I agree with it or not, but doesn't mean you're promoting it, especially if they make sense. They really don't want you to talk to a person like that.
When we first came to Poland, I actually met some Venezuelans who were refugees, you could call them, and they'd come to Poland. And it's really crazy, right? So when I saw them both, they were part of a church group and they were singing. So I went across I was like, oh, there's two other guys who are clearly not from here. So I'll strike up a conversation. And they were huge. Like, they were probably 20 stone at least. They were really fat and really great guys, really lovely, but like extremely overweight. And they showed me some photos of themselves from just a few years back in Venezuela, and they were anorexically thin. And they'd come to Poland and they'd been starved for so long that they said, when we got here, we just couldn't stop eating. We just kept eating and eating. And now look at us. And they were really like sad about it. But yeah, in Poland, the food's good, it's cheap. Yeah. And their brain just was broken from it. And I think that happened as well to people in concentration camps. Some of them actually died because they ate so much so quickly.
Yeah. But sometimes I think, I'm not playing devil's advocate. I would be the first person to say the Venezuelan regime is like any kind of socialism or communism is totally against my fundamental view of morality. But sometimes when you look at like the North Korea versus South Korea, it's not a side-by-side comparison of different ideologies because of the sanctions. If you have sanctions and other outside forces that are depriving the country of what would be the organic results of their ideology, you know what I mean? So you can't even just say that like their story is a testament to the failure of that ideology. I mean, but it sounds, I'm not trying to defend it. I feel like it's worth talking to people.
I think, the best, like, you can look at certain success stories, like Allende in Chile was doing pretty good before they did the coup and killed all those young people, rounded them all up. So he was actually doing well for the country. It looks like, the problem with Allende is that he wanted to take back all of the resources from the Western corporations. Yeah. And then
Mossadegh too. The Iranian coup that we did, Mossadegh wanted to take the oil back from Aramco, I think it was. Was it Aramco or ended up being
BP? BP.
It was BP, it was called something else at the time.
Operation Ajax, MI6, CIA. I actually had my students read the actual unclassified Operation Ajax CIA manual. Is like 30 pages. And in that document, they admit how they used BBC mainstream media to spread the fake news, and how they ran false flag operations where the CIA, MI6, I guess using their local proxies, blew up like a mosque and said it was Mossadegh. I mean, you just can't. And then
killed hundreds of innocent people.
And then I'm a Russian agent, right? Or I was supposed to have a guest on earlier this week who was former mainstream media journal, Bloomberg, like typical global liberalist. She ghosted me, whatever, but I was reading her book on Putin bad. And it's like, it's funny where even in the book, they mention how Biden says Russia might run false flag operations. But if you use that term in any way in the West, like, you're crazy conspiracy theory. Like, false flag operation.
I know.
It's like Russia. No, it's just like, I feel like we have to punch through this insane Orwellian, double speak. And I just wanted to bring up Cuba because I think Cuba is an example of it's both the sanctions, but also the communist ideology. And I think even if sanctions were removed, it wouldn't be so fantastic either. Cuba. But the interesting story about Cuba is I know people. I speak to Cubans here in Mexico. I speak to Mexicans that are coming and going to Cuba. And they say it's apocalyptic right now. It's like, it's so bad. It's literally like the end of the world on Cuba.
Worse than ever?
And there was even a story this week. There was a story this week, I think it was Miami Herald or I don't know what, that even the Cuban security forces that would torture other Cubans. It's so bad that the Cuban regime, members of the Cuban regime are escaping Cuba and going to America. Wow. And so, it's.
Did you ever read Servando Gonzalez, Psychological?
I've got the book right here. I have never read it yet. Is it good?
It's great. He's Cuban, and he said that Cuba was the testing ground for deindustrialization, which goes to something that we were talking about offline about the 15-minute cities, because there is in Spain, I think that's where the headquarters is, an organization called the Deindustrialization Organization, and it's related to those 15-minute cities. But he said they took basically the most forward Latin country because Cuba was, I should have bought it. At a map store, I saw a map of the United States and the inset, which normally now is Hawaii and Alaska. The inset was Cuba. Because Cuba was literally considered a state on this map. They expected it to become a state or like a Puerto Rico type thing. And so that the idea was to take something as most industrialized as you can and experiment on the deindustrialization process. So I think that there was like yet another factor at play in the Cuban experiment. It's possible. I would read that book. I've been trying to talk to that guy.
With all of them, right? If we've got this like global hegemon, which is this Anglo-American empire that's just been going around and looting and destabilizing. 1 second. Excuse me. Then how can you analyze any of it? In the West, we are definitely programmed to say capitalism is best, but, I don't think any of those arguments actually matter. It's always about freedom for me and liberty. Liberty is best. Liberty is the best. You can have countries that have any type of ideology, but how much freedom does the citizen have? That's paramount to me. And one thing just before we leave it, guys, that I wanted to ask you both about is Twitter under Elon Musk. Do you both think, or do you actually agree with the hypothesis that I'm going to put out there, that this whole play was to get people to say more radical things and to basically create a massive treasure trove of, I would say, comments that 2 years ago people would have never have said publicly? And also now we've got these figures that are coming in that are kind of like guiding people to say something. Like, there was one account, it's a young British guy. He must be in his early 20s. His name's David Morgan. And I remember this guy became very prominent in COVID. He was really young, but he was just tweeting lots of catchy tweets. And now he popped up in my feed recently, and it was basically like an ode to Hitler. It was like talking constantly about the Jews, and it was like, here's Hitler with some really romantic music, playing with the kids and saying how, it's basically reforming Hitler. And I just thought 2 years ago, you would never have posted something like that. And now that's your whole feed. And I'm seeing a lot of that. And I'm thinking, wow, this really feeds into this far right narrative, because what they're going to do, of course, is going to say, well, look, guys, there is a far right. They're all posting love tributes to Hitler. And I'm thinking this couldn't have happened without Elon and X being kind of reformed. So I'm thinking, for me, it seems all too perfect that is happening right in the build up to these, let's say, artificial narratives around civil war, a far right and a far left. And really, if they want to show the world that there is a far right, well, just go on Twitter and look at these accounts that started out as truth or COVID accounts. And now all of a sudden they are anti-Jew Hitler accounts. And it feels to me like a big setup. So I just wanted to throw that out there and get your opinions on
it. I think there's a lot of different threads with what they're going for. I think one of them, they need people to get back on the farm, because on X and other such platforms, because it's going to morph into WeChat, right? And so they need us to get on these platforms. And so that I feel like one reason that they opened up a bit more was for that. Like, if Facebook now is not censoring for the moment, Zuckerberg said, I kind of screwed up. And some people say because it's coming out now. And so the public opinion is that you guys were tyrants. And so some say Zuckerberg is trying to front run that and say, okay, yeah, I screwed up. I'm good, right, guys? And but I think the other thing, what you're saying, I think to get a bit metaphysical, spiritual here, and what I've talked about before, the Gnosticism, the New Age, the theosophy, the occult nature of Nazism, also communism. Mark Postia talks about that, but you are seeing, I think, this real spirit of Antichrist and resurgence in what we can call this coming Fourth Reich, right? Because you had, the Third Reich, which was occult Nazi, the elites were involved backing Hitler. And these people that you're mentioning now, I watch other Christians like Michael O'Fallon of Sovereign Nations, who does great work, James Lindsay and others are pointing this out too, that I'm not sure, Mike, that if this is just merely an attempt by the intelligence agencies for what you said, I'm worried that this might actually be a true organic spirit of the age, and that people are like really buying into this, and it's creating a momentum for a sort of repeat of what happened in 1930s Germany. And so that's my other fear there.
I have a few responses to all that. I have a couple of things occurred to me, but one of the things that I thought of when you were talking, Mike, was I've been telling everybody about these books that I'm reading, a Son of Sam book and Satanism and stuff. That's why I bought like a new crucifix, because these witchcraft books are scaring the crap out of me. And I just want some protection. One of them said, like, if you were a crucifix, you're protected. So like I can sleep with it on. But throughout those books, they really, Hitler was like a essential figure to them. Like I'm not going to say worship, but Hitler was someone they emulated. They did all, like, Charles Manson had the swastika. So the Hitler thing definitely could have some satanic elements to it. And there certainly seems to be a lot of Satanism at the top, the more I read about this stuff. I've also noticed that it very quickly went from it being over the past couple of years. So I had the radio show on a conservative network, and I would never even criticize Israel. I was like, I don't need to hear it. People call in, they go crazy. There's enough people on both sides of this. And I used to get emails all the time to come out, really anti-Semitic emails, which is, my thing was never identity or race or anything. I would say like the policy of Israel or our policy against Syria or whatever. So very quickly, a couple of years ago, some people started openly criticizing Israel and were not called anti-Semites, which prior to that they would be. Then it very quickly moved from that being totally fine, which it is, to also just, slurs and making fun of appearances and stuff like that, which you would definitely never do. So yes, is it a honeypot to like draw those people out? That's a primary thought I had. Another thing I thought was, if Israel is, if what you're seeing is true about the 40,000 people dead in Palestine in this Gaza operation, that level of atrocity, if you can muddy the criticism with anti-Semitism or even generate an actual, crimes against innocent Jewish people here. There are hundreds of thousands of people protesting Netanyahu in Israel, by the way. It's not getting covered. If you can generate this idea that like another Holocaust is coming, you can actually control, you can almost get, you can weaponize that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've got a guy in my community, a really great guy, and he lives in Israel right now. So he often tells me about what's happening on the ground, and there is a big pushback over there. And it sounds to me as well like some of the people who are in the West spot right now are actually Israelis themselves, because this totalitarianism that's coming in with censorship, and particularly the techno totalitarianism, where you're having all of these different IDs and digital infrastructure put into people's lives, that's happening really fast in Israel, and they're struggling to push back against it. So when you go online and people, like you said, Monica, get really sloppy, and now they're sharing images and everything's called the Jew did this, the Jew did that, they're responsible. I mean, I'm like, who are you talking about? Because there's so many Jewish people, and my good friend over in Israel is just like you and I. He's a great person, and his family have struggled just like our families. So yeah, I think there's something else going on. I think it's definitely trying to, like you said, muddy the water, but also potentially draw out people who they will later be lining up in the digital gulag and saying, well, look what you said 2 years ago. And I would really caution listeners against falling for that. And Elon and the free speech thing, it might not be for your benefit, guys.
That was my first response to it all along. I'm like, I'm not falling for that. I didn't fall for it 10 years ago when that's how I knew it was really an operation, because I was getting these crazy emails when I was on the radio, like begging me to come out, and because I would say, discerning things, and they didn't want that. They wanted whatever. So, but one quick question for your friend, you probably can't answer it off the top of your head. Seems to me Netanyahu basically lost 3 elections, and I would not consider him the people's choice for leader of that country right now. And I wonder how people feel about that inside.
Yeah, he sent me a really good summary recently. We didn't quite get into Netanyahu, but essentially he said that that inside it's so destabilized. Like what we see in the media puts forward this image of strength, but he said internally it's completely destabilized, and you feel that palpably in the country, that at any moment there could be some kind of coup or something could happen. So yeah, it sounds to me like a very heated place to be in the world. And I don't think, I mean, going back to what you said, Hrvoje, as well, there is this biblical aspect where it says in the Bible going into end times that, is it 70% of the world's population will turn against Israel going into...
I don't know the percentage, but that,
something like that.
Global opinion will turn against Jerusalem and Israel. And again, with so many of the different topics that are talked about in alternative media, people have this, they default to throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So it's like, I'm not going to throw, the baby is the Bible, and the bathwater are the false prophets and false churches and beliefs. So it's like, I'm not going to throw out the Bible just because of this or that, or just because Israel is carrying out these atrocities does not mean that the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, is the demiurge or Satan, or all these different examples, and I just wanted to bring up one more example just from yesterday. A fellow content creator of mine on his channel recently, he made inappropriate comments against Croats. He generalized, and he kind of made an insulting comment, saying there was this match. I don't even follow sports. I don't care. It's bread and circuses. It's boring.
Yeah.
And there was this match between Croatia and I think it was Serbia football game, and Croatian what do you call it? The hooligans, the people in the audience got crazy, and they had to stop the match for half an hour, and they were burning and doing crazy stuff. And this colleague of mine said, he took an opportunity to poop on, saying, this is how Croatians react, and in all aspects of life, like romance and life and sports, and I'm like, and I think I put a meme. I commented on his channel with a meme saying, this is the first time, like, I was being polite. I didn't get angry. I said, like, I'm gonna have to disagree with you. And he knew the type of person I was, and then he actually deleted the post. And he said, in the spirit of Yugoslav reconciliation and brotherhood, I decided to delete the post. And that was a great example. Like, that is amazing. That's how we should be. And it's like, just be. Yeah. And I agree. There are these crazy, Croats, neo-Nazi Croats. They're a minority. But that doesn't mean. And I feel the same way with Serbs. I've had more Serbs on my podcast than Croats. And so this clip this morning, I don't know if you guys saw this clip about these two Jews. It's called the podcast is actually called Two Nice Jewish Boys. Have you heard about this?
No.
So I'm gonna share this, and it's pretty mind-blowing. So it's on their actual podcast, and let's play the clip.
So I would, if you gave me a button to just erase Gaza, every single living being in Gaza would no longer be living tomorrow, I would press it in a second. That's just, I think most Israelis
if that's agree. The choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, even if it's not like right now.
Yeah, no.
I would press it right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same with the territories.
I would press it right now.
Mm-hmm.
No choice. No, Sharon is safe at home. God willing, I don't know. I haven't spoken to her in like an hour.
No, I'm saying for the chance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would press it right now. Give me that button and press it right now.
There you
go. And I think most Israelis would.
Yeah. Most Jewish
Israelis. They wouldn't post. They wouldn't talk about it like I am. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't post. They wouldn't say I pressed it.
Yeah.
But they would.
They don't have balls of steel like you.
They would, but they would press it, right? Like if they were in a closet alone, they wouldn't even hesitate.
Mm-hmm.
Someone came to them and said, "No one will know. You press this, all the Palestinians are gone." You'd be like, "Fucking hey, is there another one?"
Wow.
Yeah. So, pretty crazy. No, I mean,
I always found it really crazy how I was watching these videos coming out of Israel of Jewish people spitting on nuns, as they walked by. Like that actually shocked me. I never knew stuff like that was going on. And I think since the start of this assault on Palestine, a load has come to light. And clearly there's a huge problem. And I don't want listeners to think that any of us here don't see that, and we totally see that. There's a huge problem, and there is a radicalization that's happened. And I think that is a really great example of the radicalization of what's happened to I'd say, yeah, it seems to be, I don't want to give percentages because I don't know how much of it is being influenced by the media. Like, I don't know how much of my feed is being directed towards seeing stuff, but I also do know, and I'm really happy I've got this insight from having somebody who's in the country, that there is the complete opposite of that as well. So I think it's just really important to understand that and to not allow yourself to be completely drowned in these negative stereotypes. That totally is happening, though. That was awful what you said.
Just before Monica, I just want to mention, and for me, people will say, "Oh, then this proves, Christianity is wrong." Like, no, for me, like, this actually proves further the case of the Bible, because what these two Jews just said is very anti-Christian, and they've, they have rejected Jesus, the Messiah, God. And so they are now acting in rebellious fashion, as they often have in Old Testament times, in New Testament times. And so this was actually, the Bible talks about these types of Jews right now, but that doesn't mean that God is still not going to, redeem them. They're rebellious. And so for me, it's like, this does nothing to disprove the Old New Testament, the Bible, or Christianity. It just further confirms it, that these Israelis are acting in disobedience. They want to wipe out an entire people group. Imagine me saying to wipe out the Serbs. It's just crazy. I even went to the length. I used to have a Serbian girlfriend for a short period of time. So,
was that just to de-radicalize yourself, Hrvoje?
Yes.
But did you bring her home to mother?
I did, actually. My mother told me, do not bring her to the home.
Never again.
And I did.
Well, in response to those guys, I feel like that is a function of probably 100 years of propaganda. And I'll say two things about it. One is the way, my guess is their mentality is the way the mentality is for abortion, for race-based slavery, for colonizing, taking land away from an indigenous people. If you look at contemporary speech at that time, abortion now, and those, they say they're not people. That's what you think of this thing that stands in the way of progress, these human beings that stand in the way of progress, as you call it, just say they're not people, and then you get what you want. So I figure that's what's behind that. But I don't think it's a 2,000-year-old idea. I think I read this book. I like to talk about mainstream books. This is Lawrence in Arabia by Scott Anderson. It's War, Deceit, Imperial Folly, and the Making of the Modern Middle East. And it talks about what is now called Israel was like, 100 years ago, the British and World War I and all of that. Every footnote has story, supports what the guy is saying about like the propaganda that was used to shape people's views about that land and about the right and wrong of it. And I feel like when I hear those guys talking, they're just, that comes from intergenerational propaganda. And because that's just those guys believe themselves to be moral people. There has to be something in that mindset.
Yeah, maybe. But I just think, that's such a, it's an evil take. It's such an evil thing that people are saying. And, like in the UK, we had tons of problems with, grooming gangs and migrants. Like the scale of that was just off the charts. And I remember like I was totally anti-immigration for that. I was like, no, like our country is going to shit. We don't want no more immigration. But, there's a difference between that and then allowing yourself to actually become anti-human. So you could have an immigrant who's really good, like a good pillar of society, who's doing the right thing. And it's a really lazy, I'd say bestial way of thinking. And I think across the board, they're trying to get us all into that bestial state where it's like, we just want to rip heads off. We're full of hate and spite. And I would say that's going to be the challenge of our time, is to ensure you don't become that, to keep your humanity and to see the individual in front of you, no matter what. Even, like a trans person, for example, this is a big thing in the West. It's like mocking, ridiculing. And I'm like, yeah, but what you're really actually ridiculing half the time is really mentally disturbed kids who probably got abused, maybe have a slew of mental health issues, but maybe worse than that even, maybe these kids are like suicidal or whatever. And I'm like, I actually worked with kids that were being put onto that conveyor belt into going to become trans. There was one girl in particular who I was working with, and she figured out like a month. No, it was a week or 2 weeks. I can't remember. 1 or 2 weeks before the surgery that she was actually gay. And I'm like, if that girl's story was online, she'd be laughed at and mocked. And it's almost like the right-wing media will embrace them if they come across to their side, but otherwise they mock them. And I think the human approach is actually to say, no, we should have compassion for all of those kids, because every one of them is being harmed, being pushed down this track. And Yeah, I'm just very careful with all that stuff. I just think we have to keep our humanity. That's for me.
And the identity politics on the right, which I credit Trump for finally ushering in, and the white Christian nationalism. Did I tell you about Adrian Vermeule last time? Did we talk about this? There was a Cass Sunstein. You're probably familiar with Cass Sunstein, was Obama's information czar. And he, together with this guy, Adrian Vermeule, wrote an essay about conspiracy theorists and how to deal with them. And one of the ways they talked about dealing with them was cognitive infiltration, to get inside truther communities. It was specifically about 9/11, and plant like crazy ideas, things that will derail them, untruths. Well, I happened to stumble upon that name, Adrian Vermeule, again more recently, and my jaw dropped. He's a Harvard professor who is known for spearheading what's called Catholic integralism. And the idea is that the Catholic Church should inform the morality of the laws of the United States, which is ridiculous because we're not even a Catholic majority country, much less. I mean, you would really have to be in all, like the Philippines is the only place I can think of.
You're speaking about Poland when you say that. That is totally what it's like here.
But I don't begrudge people their own sovereign systems, like if that's how you want it, if everybody's the same religion, it makes sense. Like abortion is one of those things where, if you're a Catholic country, yes, I mean, it's very clear that that's a human being and you're not going to kill them. But people who are atheists say there's no soul. They might say, you don't have rights while you're feeding off of somebody else, or what they'll say is it's not a person, which doesn't make sense to me. But yeah, I just think it's interesting that this guy is spearheading that movement. And there is, to your point, very anti-Christian ideas, and the identity politics in itself, like racism, bigotry, is a sin against the Holy Spirit, because you really can't dehumanize somebody like that. You're required to have charity and really will the best for the other person. And what these people come in as children, they cannot be held responsible. My grandmother was a Syrian orphan in a convent in like upstate New York. She can't. You could hate her all you want for her, her appearance, but she was really innocent. And so you can care about the policies and you can recognize the social impact, but you cannot hate the person.
I just want to touch on what you both were saying, and you mentioned this integralist. Again, Michael O'Fallon. I think he's, for me, one of the thought leaders on the cutting edge of what foreshadowing what's coming. Where I disown sort of this right movement now in America that's on the bandwagon of MAGA, flirting with white nationalism, and it's very carnal in nature. So they're not looking for spiritual solution. What you guys talking about? Jesus, said, love your enemies, treat the foreigners. I'm not calling for illegal mass migration. We should have borders. We should have law and order. But you're supposed to treat people kindly, even if they're being bad to you, because your natural, visceral, carnal reaction will be to get angry, right? And start cursing and physically fighting. And Jesus is like, no, the godly way is to remain calm, love the person. If they insult you, don't insult them back. Have grace and mercy and long suffering. And you're seeing this right movement now that's theocratic, Christian nationalism, dominionist, calling for violence. They want to implement, fascist theocracy. And it's almost like, I feel like that is a spirit of, just like the whole far left, Marxist, globalist, liberal, communist, satanic thing is that's a spirit of Antichrist. So is this one. And it's almost like a repeat of the 1930s where, Satan might use, but again, this does nothing to throw away the Bible, what true Christianity or Bible is. So I think we have to always have this nuance to separate things. And I wanted to go back to what you mentioned. That was fascinating about what you said about Servando Gonzalez. I'm going to have to read his book now. I don't think he's active anymore. Is he?
I have never been able to reach him. I've tried many, many times.
I think he's very old, and I've seen his website. It's not updated
he must be
anymore. And I think
he almost got Peter Dale Scott, too. He was 92, and he was like, because Jeremy Kuzmarov.
I interviewed Peter Dale Scott on my old channel more than 10 years ago. I sent him into my classroom.
He said, I'll try me again. I've got COVID, but I let the guy off the.
He's very old. I saw him recently on Aaron. I forget his name. American who runs a channel and it was a phone. Like they couldn't get him on the video, so it was just phone because he's in his mid-90s. But I want to bring up the 15-minute cities. That was fascinating what you said about the experiment of Cuba, and I could totally see that. And for me, the big news is they're going full open now with the global project. And here in Mexico, it's like I've been saying this for the past 4 years now, and I haven't heard many people saying this. They paint Mexico as this land of the free, let's all escape to Mexico. And yeah, I think it's better in some regards than other places, but we have to be precise and factual. And now let me share my screen again. This is a story from an official Mexican publication. I just did the auto translation. This is just from like, what, a week ago, a little more. Mexico City so Mexico City is the biggest city in Mexico. It's got like 25 million people or something. Mexico City is going to be filled with utopias to achieve 15-minute city. And, I just did a quick mental calculation. It takes maybe 3 hours to cross the entirety of Mexico City. If you divide 3 hours by 15, you get 15, I think. That's, is it? No, wait. No, not quite. 12. Close to 15. But it's almost like they can divide Mexico City into 15-minute cities. And that's basically what they're saying. So they're going to be now implementing 50. And it wasn't the only one. I can't find it. Now there was an actual piece from actual Mexican government tweet from a week ago talking about planning for 15-minute cities. And then you've got this guy. He's a mayor in the state of Nuevo León, of some city in Nuevo León. It's Miguel Trevino, San Pedro. San Pedro is, I guess, he's the mayor of San Pedro. And this is from his tweet a week ago. He says, imagine living in a place where everything you need is just a 15-minute walk away. Work, schools, shops, parks, and more. That's a 15-minute district. A city model designed to make your life simpler, more sustainable, and more connected. And when he says district, I think like Hunger Games. And this is literally, it seems like, what they're doing is Hunger Games. They can't create prisons to put all of us in. So they're bringing the prisons to us, and they're removing the car lanes, removing the cars, putting your medical center near to you, your supermarket, your workspace, or you work from home. And first it's like you won't have to leave. And then later with geolocation and CBDCs where your money won't function outside of 15-minute cities, you literally won't be able to leave. And these are ghettos, like the Nazi Jewish ghettos or the Soviet, ghettos or gulags, or they're literally putting us into ghettos and gulags, 15-minute cities. And for me, what's mind-blowing is now to see this official Mexican newspaper saying 15-minute cities, the mayor's saying 15-minute cities, and Russia's building 15-minute cities, and different places in the US now 15-minute cities. Trump is like freedom cities, and Canada, and you name it. It's just it's crazy.
Yeah, but people are gonna love this. Like, that's the problem, is like, no matter how much we can, we'll sit here and talk about all of the reasons, it is absolutely abhorrent and it's going to lead to untold problems and totalitarianism. I can guarantee you the majority of young people will absolutely love it because they don't like activity. They want everything to be convenient. It's the convenience generation. I mean, we was driving back from the mountains a while back. It was like last year. And we stopped on the way. We was looking for a coffee and we were going past the city and it was on the outskirts. So we kind of drove in to grab a coffee. And as we went in, there was these new flats. And at the bottom layer of all the flats, there was a really nice coffee shop. There was a pharmacy. There was a government building to do your admin. And it was clean. It was fresh. Everyone there looked happy and young. And we was like, wow, this is pretty nice. And we went and had our coffee. And then we got a sandwich and we was walking through it. And I was like, compared to most flats, these ain't so bad. And then I just looked at my wife and I said, oh my God, we're in a 15-minute city. I was like, get out. And and that's the problem, right? It is nice and it is convenient. It's not going to look like a prison cell to the first generation. It's going to be like you said, Hrvoje, once they layer on technology and now your car doesn't work and it's like, well, you've got everything you need anyways. And yeah, that's the problem.
It's a perfect picture of Patrick McGoohan's The Prisoner. The Village.
Yes.
It's literally going to be The Village with Patrick McGoohan.
So I have, I did 3 episodes on this a year ago. When Oxford, England came down with the 15-minute city, and then I dug in. Paris was doing a lot of it. Barcelona was doing a lot of it. Saudi Arabia has that giant wall they're building. I don't know if you're familiar with this. They're building this crazy wall that's like 150 stories high. Yeah, the line. And every 15-minute walk is a whole new one. You get like the same things over and over again. You get a new dry cleaner or whatever. And the thought, there was many things that I pulled out of like the agenda and stuff. One was that I remember when Trump pulled out of the Paris Accords, the mayors went directly to the UN or whatever it was, the mayors. And I said, oh, this is how they're going to get globalism. They're going to have mayors skipping the nation state. Then I realized that there were these like
C40.
Yes, and Michael Bloomberg founded it, and so the mayors get together. They even have the Black Mayors Association, which is very insider-y, and my guess is half the mayors in this country are Black, but they have their own association. And these associations of mayors, they have agendas. They get the memo. Michael Bloomberg is probably in charge of both of them, but that's one way that it's like a backdoor to globalism. Another big thing with these 15-minute cities, which prior to the whole COVID thing, prior to the walking thing, they called them digital cities, and they were trying to get them implemented, but they couldn't get employers to allow their workers to plug in digitally. So now with COVID, they implemented that. They celebrate that openly, the 15-minute city advocates. They said they intentionally did things like tell people not to walk on sidewalks, put dining tables in the middle of roads so that people would stop driving. So I wondered, I was like, did they anticipate that people were going to start walking in the streets? That was on the agenda before COVID, that they wanted people to walk in the street and bikes to use the sidewalks. That was a big thing. And the reason that I think they want to digitize everybody's work is so they can have a truly global labor force, which would absolutely tank wages. If they have a lot of robotized, automated actual functioning, like real physical stuff or robots and all the coders and all that, there's no barriers at all to them. The first world's wages are going to plummet. And another big thing, I've only got like two more things. The big thing was the infrastructure contracts because what you're talking about, that mayor, if you look at what they're doing, what they're planning parks, they're planning new hospitals. Rosa Quarry used to warn, like, don't let them build islands in your main street. They're doing that here in Pasadena all over the place. They're screwing up roads by building like barriers in the middle of the roads. And that keeps emergency vehicles from quick access. So then they have to build little clinics near you. Like if you slow down that access, everything needs its own. And those contracts are going to be big money. And then, but I would say this, to Mike's point, is when it's shiny and new, it looks nice and it's going to be very attractive. However, once you have no competition whatsoever, once it's a monopoly, A, productivity will decline, but B, there'll be if you don't have alternatives, they will let that stuff deteriorate and you'll live in a hole. It won't be shiny and new. It'll be dirty. And that is what actually happened in the airports during COVID. They shut half the stores down. And I remembered it was filthy. The few flights that I did take, it was just disgusting. And you had to eat in the one restaurant that was still open, even though there was literally garbage under the tables. And I had a vision. I was like, the international airport terminal looks really nice until they lock the doors and and there's no way out.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Garden City movement as well. This is something they tried in the UK back in the early 1900s, where they basically said, what we're going to do is we're going to create all of these satellites, and then those satellites are going to have their own satellites, and each one's going to be a self-sustaining unit. So we're going to put people there, then we're going to bring in the food from the agricultural parts of the countryside. They're going to go to the Garden City, and it's going to help people in this industrialized society not have to travel and not have to worry about pollution and things like this. And There was even experiments in the UK where they started to build blocks of flats, and on the bottom row, just like I said I saw in Poland, they were putting in all of the necessary infrastructure. This happened in London, and they became the most violent and crime-ridden places in the country. And it happened in Wales too. And all of these places became the worst places to live. It had the complete opposite effect. And I think that's exactly what will happen too, that density of people in those places.
I wanted to ask you guys, because we didn't bring this up, the Telegram thing, because I started with all this stuff across the West, and Pavel Durov now, right? Telegram arrested by French authorities. And was there someone else? I feel like there was another story. Well, I mean, there's Elon Musk with
the Brazil thing, yeah.
But that's a tricky thing, because some people have been pointing out, Mike Benz has been saying that it's actually USA State Department that is backing the Brazilian government's totalitarianism. But at the same time, I feel Elon Musk is the, he's just a refined face of the deep state, the globalist
definitely.
Deep state. And I don't trust him or believe him. Sure, I'll use X, whatever. But at the end of the day, I don't care. I'll use whatever means necessary. I mean, I should rephrase that. I should use whatever peaceful, nonviolent means, of getting information out. But it's almost like regime change. X and Musk is in favor of regime change. I'm sure when the DOD says like, well, we need to regime change this country, Elon Musk is like, okay, let me help you. He's part of that same system. They're working really hard. This whole NATO Atlantic Council thing is, they're trying to put a smiley face. People in the past have talked about friendly fascism, or, William Engdahl wrote a book called Totalitarian Democracy, where they put a smiley face on the fascism. So kind of that's what Atlantic Council, NATO, and all that system is. And so your thoughts on, Pavel Durov, Telegram. I don't believe in heroes or good guys. As Kissinger said, these are all just interests. I view them all as not really good guys. There's a lot of ego involved, a lot of personal empires. I'm sure Pavel Durov wants his empire, and Russian oligarchs and then Western oligarchs. And I don't necessarily trust Telegram. I don't really trust Telegram either. But what are your thoughts on what's happening with Telegram?
Well, I'm just going to hand this one off to Monica, because as soon as I saw this guy, my spidey senses were tingling. He had all of the same indicators of a character that had been designed for public consumption. And then I listened to a couple of your recent shows, Monica, and I think you completely knocked it out of the park. So I'll hand it to you.
Thank you. Well, I was never really followed this guy before. I'm not, don't really use Telegram. So I just took it for its face value. It's like, okay, RT was like, this is horrible. They're arresting this guy, talk about free speech. We didn't even do that. And we had beef with him. So I went into it with an open mind, but by the end of it, I was like, this guy is a Western asset for sure. And it was because if you look at what his origin is, first of all, they call him the Zuckerberg of Russia. So you know what that means. It's kind of like Israel saying October 7th is our 9/11. It's like, oh, yes. Yes, it is. So he says, so what his origin was, he created VK, whatever it was, Communique or whatever, in I think 2013, and what his beef with Russia, which his famous claim to fame that he wouldn't give up the encryption, he wouldn't give them a backdoor. I'm not sure they wanted a backdoor. What they wanted was for him to shut down, quote, Ukrainian protesters who were using VK to organize. But if you remember in 2014, and 2013, the Ukrainian protesters were a U.S. run coup operation against a democratically elected government. So that's that we've talked about this before, I think, where if you're going to, if you don't have a pathocracy where your government is against you, if your government actually has your interests at heart, and these are foreign actors trying to overthrow a democratic country, I can understand why they would say, like, it's actually a crime to do that. Those were engaged in violence. So that this guy fell on his sword to protect what are clearly witting or unwitting U.S. assets. That was super fishy just to start out with. And then he said, Telegram's position is that we obey all the rules, including the European Digital Services Act. But the rules are pretty mild for Telegram because they are not what's called by them, quote, very large. Well, when this guy got arrested, the downloads of Telegram went through the roof. And my suspicion is that it will qualify as very large at some point under the Digital Services Act. And then all bets are off as far as encryption and all of that. So I feel like this is all, playing out. And he was in French custody for 96 hours. That's a great way to get your orders, to debrief, whatever. They make the guy super rich. He's got like 4 passports. So that guy, I smell a rat for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he's got the same hallmarks of so many others. We've seen this happen time and time again. And I think we've all, I always try and say this to people, you have to really get out of this paradigm that they're giving you as to how the world works. There are no, we've got this really superficial archetypal narrative where there's the good guys, the bad guys, there's the genius, the mad genius, all of those different characters that they give you. And it's like, no, the way it works is somebody builds something, they immediately have intelligence agents swarming all over them. And now they're basically becoming a diplomat and a pawn in about 50 games and having to manage all of this. They've got loads of new people in their lives and friends who are also connected to all those networks. And they have no idea what's real or what's not real anymore. And they get batted around from pillar to post until they eventually settle upon an agreement with somebody. And he's probably got 1 million agreements. He's got some with Russia. He's got some with the West. And they're also always building the narrative for the public as well. So, that's why you've got Elon Musk's narrative that has really grown over the past decade. He went from being this geeky nerd guy who got rich with PayPal to now he's Mr. Free Speech. He's here to save the world along with Trump and his bionic ear and Alex Jones, who's been reformed completely, which was crazy. That this is how it works. And I think it's way more complex than we know. And every narrative that we have is childlike. We have to dispel that immediately. And then accept that there's certain parts of it that we'll never know. But there are red flags and indicators. And I think you picked up on a lot there. And and also this kind of sheen. That's one thing I will say is that all of these characters they create always have this kind of Hollywood sheen. Like this guy, he's buff, he's fasting,
Fathered 100 children.
Fathered 100 children. Elon Musk is trying to catch up, I think. And so for me, it was a bit of a non-entity narrative, but I'm really glad it was picked apart because I just felt suspicious of it.
And just one note on Elon. I mean, this guy is a CEO of 5 huge companies, some of which are really cutting edge, all of them really, Neuralink, SpaceX, Boring, X, and I think there's another one, Tesla. So these are extremely cutting edge companies. And I was a banker and worked for very small companies. Like the bonds that we used to do was like $100 million, which is not a lot of money. It was more back then, but it's really not a lot of money. These are small. Like I had one company that made batteries, another company that made toothbrushes. The CEOs wouldn't even talk to me. Like I was so low on their radar that I was carrying their bags. If you have a CEO that's responsible, like GM or whatever, that guy is totally immersed in that business. And it is really amazing to be able to run a whole entire company like that. You're not the guy in the garage, the guy testifying before Congress, the guy running this company, the guy running 5 of these companies, and the guy saying stupid things and breaking laws in every country, including his own, and staying standing. That is not a real person. And that's Elon Musk's actual story.
Yeah, I mean, I just imagine there's an entire team, like a DARPA, DOD, whatever team managing all of this.
Everyone, I agree.
Stuff. And
he gets debriefed what to say.
Yeah, and what Mike was saying earlier, just yesterday, I don't trust anyone anymore. Like, there's a certain threshold in alternative media where these people get a flood of money, they get very polished, they get huge audiences like Candace Owen, Andrew Tate. First of all, the values that he espouses, I completely reject. He's no role model, Andrew Tate, the Tate brothers, at all. And then, his father was CIA. And then, Candace Owen is totally weird, where she married some British royal dude after they met for like 2 weeks. And then, then she knew Tate before. And like, what the hell is going on? And then, Ryan, I saw a thread on Twitter yesterday, Ryan Dawson, some alt media guy, he's getting paid by Tate. Like, seriously, like I'm done with all of this stuff.
That was one of my favorite videos of the year, because I don't follow any of those people. I think they're all just psyopy. And but the Candace Owen clip where she's talking to Andrew Tate about Hustler University with a really straight face and saying how, oh yeah, I hired a guy who graduated from your online Hustler University, and it really changed his life. And I'm like, just the name Hustler University, come on guys, come on. And like, yeah, I've had a lot of people say to me when I've tried to give a response to the Andrew Tate thing, they've said like, but he's helping a lot of young men. And I'm like, no, he's feeding you back into dead materialism, narcissism, greed, which is exactly what the system wants you to be. So, but
I escaped the matrix.
Yeah, he escaped the matrix. All right. Yeah. And, so yeah, we've spoke about this on my podcast before. Me and PJ Byes actually did an episode called Archetypes of the Father, where we spoke about archetypes to do with fatherhood, because PJ was just about to have his first child. You've actually had PJ on, Hrvoje, on your show. He's just had his first child. So shout out to PJ and Siobhan on that beautiful baby you've got. But yeah, we actually spoke about Andrew Tate on there. So if listeners want to hear my take a bit more extended, check out that one, because he really is exactly what the system wants. They would love for you to be like that.
There's something fishy. I'm looking, because I don't follow any of those people either. So I just Googled Wikipedia Candace Owens, and it says in April 2024, Owens announced that she had converted to the Catholic Church. Well, I should say Catholicism, and had been baptized in the Brompton Oratory. J.D. Vance converted to Catholicism. Tony Blair converted to Catholicism. Newt Gingrich converted. When I see that, as what they call a cradle Catholic, I absolutely and I'm married to a convert, but that is very fishy to me. And that's when I started looking into the Adrian Vermeule. That's how I stumbled upon Adrian Vermeule, is this idea that and I feel like this is true about they're co-opting the hierarchical stuff, the kind of, rules-based, take it or leave it thing. They like that structure. They're kind of doing that with Islam in Europe, potentially, I think. Like they want people to accept a hierarchical baseline. And I think the idea came from, they just could not put down that right to life, the anti-abortion movement here. They've been trying for 50 years. They couldn't put it down. And they decided, I think, to co-opt it, both for Trump stuff. They took the pedophilia stuff. They used that for anti-Semitism. You'll notice like the Jeffrey Epstein, it folds in with all of that. I think that was all to capture and co-opt the zeitgeist of the pro-life movement of Catholicism, because it's powerful and people won't walk away from it. They're not going to destroy it, which Russia discovered from the Orthodoxy. Similarly, you're not going to destroy it. The best thing you can do is destroy it from within or infiltrate it. That's why I'm a little suspicious of Vigano, the bishop who says that the Pope is the Antichrist, was excommunicated. I feel like they're using Catholicism. So when I see somebody has recently converted for no good reason, Catholicism is not the most popular it doesn't make you cool, but I guess in some respects nowadays in the super alt-right, it does make you cool, and that makes me worried.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys mind if I just share this clip, but just so listeners can see what I'm referring to with the Hustlers University. And I think for those that don't know, the Andrew Tate model with the Hustlers University, it was basically teaching people how to basically pimp people, pimp women. That's what he was doing.
Hustler is a nudie magazine.
Yeah, so what he was doing was he was teaching people how to, let me see if I can get this sorted out. Unfortunately, when When you share the Zoom screen, it kind of puts this big black bar right where you want it.
You can move.
But yeah,
you can
so
move the
basically-
bar if you just click on the top part of the black. It moves.
Okay, I've got it here. Yeah, so he was teaching people how to do what he did, which is where he created a cam business and got a load of young women, which he then tricked into becoming cam girls by making them feel like he was in a relationship with them. And yeah, that was how he got rich to begin with, was basically getting all these women on board so he could share this with them. So yeah, okay, I'll share it with you and you can listen to what it says.
And I had not even realized how successful University was. It's a full.
Oh, okay. This one is.
I can hear it.
Yeah, for some reason it keeps pausing. I'll just try one more time.
And take a look at what you and your brother have built. And
okay, I'm going to abandon that, guys. But yeah, okay, listeners can just find it on Twitter. But yeah, so that's essentially what he did, and then Candace Owen had this sit-down interview, and she was clearly. I mean, it seems to me like she was paid for this. It was like an advertisement. And she was like, what you guys built with Hustler University and trying to legitimize it. He's actually changed the name now because it turns out Hustlers University doesn't fit the brand anymore. But yeah, and I think I saw a video also of his brother talking recently about, what was it? I mean, I don't want to libel myself, but I think it was about again, trapping. Oh, it was about how to convince virgins to have sex with you. And it was like, basically, he made a literal course for how you can hunt down virgins and get them to have sex with you. That could be satanic.
They like to rape virgins.
Yeah,
I don't know if
again,
seducing counts.
For me, it doesn't quite meet the moral threshold of, what we should be sharing with young people. So, yeah, I'll hand it over.
Folks, we've covered a lot. I thought I'd show this just for fun. I checked my feeds and stuff, and on my LinkedIn, it showed me who the people recently were that were looking at my profile.
Oh yeah.
Do you see who out there rings of the four?
Oh my gosh!
Oh wow!
The Club of Rome. Someone at the Club of Rome says top companies your searchers work at. The Club of Rome is looking into me. So what's going on there? Anyway, that's fun. I mean, who knows? There can be,
oh man, you're hot. You're too hot to handle.
I got DHS NATO coming after me. I got Club of Rome. No, I mean, it could be just innocuous. Maybe they saw.
Invite them on Geopolitics. Get one of them.
By the way, you know what happened to me?
You should.
But it doesn't say who it was. But maybe they saw a clip I posted and they thought I was pro Club of Rome and talking about sustainability, and then they look at me and they're like, "Oh, this guy's anti-globalist." You know what happened to me recently? I posted on for my weekly paid subscribers thing. Do you know David Rubenstein?
Heard of him?
So
the name rings a bell.
David Rubenstein is a billionaire, and he I'm trying to find my email.
Carlyle Group.
Yeah, so David Rubenstein is a co-founder of Carlyle Group, which is like, if you've seen the movie, The International with Clive Owen, I think. It's a great movie about the international banking globalist structure. I view the Carlyle.
The chairman of the CFR. Go ahead.
He's the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, and he's on the board of trustees of World Economic Forum. Twice in the past couple of years, I've had, I'm on the list of some of these big name publishing companies, PR agents, and once in a while they'll send me, "Hey, would you like to interview this person?" So they send me an email and say,
"Wow,
would you like to interview David Rubenstein?"
Wow.
And this happened like a year or two ago. And I'm like, yes.
Yes.
And then the first time I can't remember what they said, if they responded or they said sorry, no, or we may have even scheduled something. And then I got another one. He's got a new book out. And they sent me an email, "Would you like to interview David Rubenstein?" I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
And then so he sends me an email. I say, yes. And he responds, "Thanks, Hrvoje. I'm afraid this one will not work out. But if something changes, I'll let you know." So it's like, why do you email me in the first place then?
Did you write back and say, "Why did you email me if you weren't interested"?
No, I haven't.
Obviously, it's a form, like you're on their list, but you could.
Well, I do have to say, this same agent did secure my interview with Ambassador Stuart Eisenstadt. So it's not a complete
Yeah, no,
loss.
I've had a few good interviews that way, but
So-
boy, 999 out of 1,000 of those, I'm like, no. But this would be a good yes.
But I also had the beginning of the week, again, another publisher pitched me this standard mainstream author. It's like one of those typical boring cutout books on Putin bad, Russia evil.
Yeah.
And I had put the Zoom link. We had everything arranged.
Yeah.
And the morning, I sent a reminder the night before in the morning. They're like, "Oh, sorry, something came up. The person we'll have to reschedule." And I'm sure they're not going to email me.
Yeah,
and
no,
say
they looked at your actual stuff and they were just like, "Oh, we don't want to give this guy our, don't want to feed you."
But they're so horrible. It's like, do your homework.
Do your research, yeah.
And it's like, if I'm not talking to any more mainstream people because they waste my time. I was literally reading the person's book, preparing notes, and it's like, screw you.
It takes a lot of time. Like when you prepare for an interview. I remember, one woman, she no-showed, and then ghosted me, and I'd spent like 5 hours getting ready.
Oh, yeah. And you carved out the day. Like you didn't do the other things you have to do on that day.
And I stayed up late.
Infuriating.
At least, 1 or 2 nights. I came home early from church, which I don't normally do. But so I was behind her reading her book, and it's just like, my goodness, you people.
We're showing listeners how the sausage is made. Like this is behind the scenes of what happens in podcast.
You should dox her. You should out her. Out her right now.
Yeah, I should do. She was really cool as well, actually. And now I don't think so anymore, but I enjoyed her stuff before then. Anyways, but what about the emails you get where somebody is like touting for an interview and they're like, "Here's a list of approved questions." And I'm like,
I haven't gotten that one.
I've had a few. There's like, "This is the guy. This is why he's amazing and excellent, and you should have him on the show. And here's a list of approved questions." And I'm just like, no. It's like
they're using you, and that means your interview will be the exact same as everybody else's. So I hate that. What's the point of that?
Well, I always think maybe we should say yes, and then I'm just going to completely go off script and just.
And then the person drops the call. Yeah.
Yes. Do you belong to any secret societies? That would be like the first question.
I think we're out of time, but there was another topic. Maybe we can touch on it next time. What do you think? The AI data center climate change thing. Should we save that for next time?
It's quick.
Okay.
Let's just do it. I think we've got like 5 minutes. What do you think?
Yeah, go ahead then.
My thing is quick. It's just that I've noticed in 2 different articles I read on the same day. I had one from about China. It says China's AI engineers are secretly accessing banned NVIDIA chips. And that story is about how in Brisbane and other places, I think Saudi Arabia was mentioned, that there are Bitcoin servers, farms that are idle now because they're no longer as hot as they used. Well, they're always hot because they're physically hot. But they're not being used like they used to. So they're being repurposed for AI. And that because there are all these sanctions against China, China is accessing them for its needs kind of off-site. But then at the same time, on the same day, this crazy story I read, I was telling you about this guy, Christian Angermeyer, who don't have any idea why there's a full-page article about him on the Wall Street Journal. And he was supposedly invests Tether's money. Tether has a lot of money. He invests their money. A lot of his investments go belly up, or are terrible investments, but they keep coming back to him and blah, blah, blah. I'm sure this guy is being set up for some kind of public position, like a Pavel Durov or whatever. This guy's going to have some public persona, but it says one of the things that he was investing in, this is the same day, was Northern Data, which is a German-listed Bitcoin miner that recently pivoted towards AI cloud hosting. It actually bought a couple of crypto companies, and although it was a terrible deal, they lost a lot of money. Tether continues to plow money into it. And my thought on that was similar to my thought on green energy, which was, Hrvoje, you're the only other person I heard who said this, that, and then Mike was also validating it, that maybe they set this stuff up to build up these infrastructures to get us to have an overabundance of energy, to have new sources of energy, or all these server farms that are already kind of sucking the energy out of the world, because those things are actually related. because AI is going to take so much of these resources. AI, by the way, which they're not willing to share with us. This is like supposedly they want to cap our access to AI at basically where it is right now. So it's the Joe Rogan guys, the Harris brothers said, we wrote a report for the Senate and we think that the U.S. military should control all the AI that's more smarter than what we have right now. But that doesn't mean they're going to stop just absorbing all these resources. But I think it was a plan from decades ago, potentially.
I totally agree with that. I've thought it all along that the whole crypto craze was to get people to build out the infrastructure for so many of this. It was the first of the infrastructure for the new platforms that are going to host NFTs and tokenization. Larry Fink has been saying tokenization is going to happen to all physical assets. This is exactly the kind of thing these guys want. They want a total global asset registry where everything you own, so not just the financialized assets like your stocks and bonds, but also your artwork, your gold coins, your silver, whatever you've got at home. They want that. And the way they're going to do that is to tokenize it. So when people talk about crypto craze and Bitcoin was here to save us, I'm like, maybe not. Maybe it's actually, remember, Bitcoin came, the actual address bitcoin.com was first registered in August 2008, which was even before the Lehman Brothers collapse. So, it was before the depths of the GFC. And if you go back historically, go back to the railway bubble, which sounds crazy. The railway mania in the UK in the 1840s. What happened there was they wanted essentially this new technology at the time, which was railways. They wanted massive infrastructure to be built and rolled out. And the way they did it was to lower interest rates, make credit really cheap, to deregulate as much as they could, to get all of these private investors and entrepreneurs to come in. And they essentially gave out contracts to anyone and everyone who would show up. And then they got the mainstream crowd in by saying, oh, this is going to, these companies are going to change the world and you're all going to get rich. There's no risk. And in 10 years, they built 6,000 miles of track, which, to put into context, in the UK today, there's only 11,000 miles and the population was far less back then. But it created a massive asset price bubble too. And they all went out of business besides like 3 or 4 of them. Now go to 2000, the dot-com bubble, the exact same thing happened. In 1996, there was the Telecommunications Act where they deregulated, they lowered interest rates again, they got all the investors in, they created a massive bubble, and they created a huge oversupply of broadband, fiber network.
I remember that. Yeah, because Lucent went bankrupt, basically.
Fiber optic cables, that's the one. And then it all went belly up, but they created the infrastructure for what? For the internet. And then, of course, people could get the internet very cheap because there was a massive oversupply. Well, the same thing just happened with cryptos. And a lot of that now, the energy is actually being transferred over to AI. And I just don't think it's coincidence. I've got a quote here that says that industry analysts predict about 20% of the capacity currently used by Bitcoin miners, which is 0.4% of global energy, which is huge, is going to be shifted over to AI by 2027. So it seems to me there's a pattern throughout history where you have them deregulate, lower interest rates, give people lots of incentives to start building out the infrastructure. They don't touch it at all for about a decade or so, which is what happened with crypto. They didn't regulate it. Then once the infrastructure has been created, now all of a sudden they step back in and say, oh, sorry, guys, we're going to take back control of this. And I think that's what's happening. That's why you're seeing Bitcoin ETFs and Larry Fink and Michael Saylor and all these people embracing it. Is because they've already controlled that space. And sadly, I don't think it's going to be a freedom tool. I think all of it was probably planned decades ago. And final thing I'll say on that is the energy that they need to build these smart cities and these techno-totalitarian infrastructure around our lives, it's going to be so massive. They have to build out the capacity now before we can actually create those things. And if you don't see them doing it, it's because they're doing it behind your back. And I think crypto is the vehicle for a lot of that. And so that's my take on it.
It's just like internet was free for a decade or two, and now they're they've destroyed it. You go on any search engine now, there's nothing there. It's just mainstream. I'm like, I was looking for an author. And I had to ask a friend, It literally took me going into 3 or 4 or 5 pages to find that guy's website, which is literally his name, which is literally what I typed it in. I'm like, what the hell? And I think when you go back to technocracy, 1930s movement, and then you have 60s and 70s, Club of Rome, World Economic Forum, DARPA, all this stuff, they projected where they're planning, how they were planning to take over the world, cybernetics, all that stuff. And, the birth of the internet. And I think they calculated, as you said, Mike, what they would need and where they were going. And they realized that they're going to need a mass amount of energy to carry out the global technocracy. And so that's when they started with the climate narrative, the ecological narrative, because they're going to have to convince us to transfer our energy, to let them have the energy, which then they're going to use to build these cities. And if you just take a look around, like even just in my daily life here in Mexico, it takes a lot to build out energy infrastructure. Water, public waterworks, electricity, internet, roads, the traffic, things just constantly break down. My internet was out for like an hour, I think, yesterday. And so just things are constantly breaking down. It's a huge investment of money and energy. And it's not easy to do, to build out this infrastructure. We do have, I think, in some ways, certain limits to energy, because to build this stuff out at a massive scale in towns and cities and countries, it takes so much money and manpower. And it's interesting. I had a guest on that I interviewed yesterday. I published the podcast Warwick Powell, and he said, he works with bankers and he's a professor and he works in China and all this stuff. He said regarding the algorithm ghetto, there's slippage, meaning it can't be implemented perfectly, and technology inevitably brings with it possibilities of all sorts of resistance. He did say, this is just getting off topic for a second. There's something he mentioned about multipolarity. He's big on multipolarity, but he said multipolarity is about the reassertion of sovereignty and an increased interoperability of states, which for me proves my point that it's about world government. It's about advancing the global technocracy and making states more interoperable, which is world government. But yeah, anyways, those are my 2 cents.
I have to respond to that. I'm sorry. I'll talk fast. They are bringing back, so they got us to move to the green stuff, but they are now talking about bringing back gas, coal, nukes. There's a big thing to ramp up nukes, and they're actually saying it's AI. They're starting to back off EVs, electric vehicles. So they talked about EVs as being the reason to build up the grid and all of that, but they're not gonna have us have any cars, fossil or EV. And yes, a lot of the resources there, gas, coal, nukes, those use finite materials, a finite amount, like even nukes is uranium. It's an actual, I don't even know if we do much to it to get it to just throw off the heat, but eventually it'll. Of your search, and then it goes deep.
Guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
So literally, I lost the internet, and I lost you for like a minute.
Right, well,
so
I actually have this recorded as a backup, so we can.
Okay, so they'll figure that out.
Yes. See, because I went too far. I had to have the last word. And I blew up your internet.
But there's a perfect example, like what I just said. My internet just keeps going out, and they gotta keep plugging holes. And this stuff is going to be what we said earlier. It's going to be like Soviet style everything. 15-minute cities. Life will be, like the movie video game Half-Life 2, or. It really feels like
nothing will work. It will just be a mess. Like nothing will work. Everything will be failing constantly. And the only thing that part of it that will work is their control, like data centers and the things that they need to keep spying on people. I mean,
Food
if you
lines,
go back to like,
right.
Soviet, if you go back to like East Germany or like Soviet Poland, like the only thing that actually seemed to work was their massive data gathering. That was the only bit that worked because they focused all their energy on that. And this is kind of a good metaphor for all of the energy they're going to be taking from the grid. Is estimated 10% of all US energy will be used for data centers within a few years. 10%, that's like 10% for complete nonsense. People used to spend their energy to what? To keep the candle. You had to have candles on while farmers were like plowing fields at night just to produce food to eat or, to raise your children. But this is all going to be for nonsense. And, okay, I don't want to get into I know we're getting towards the end of it, but I've always thought it's a huge hypocrisy that nobody really talks about. Is they're talking about the planet is going to die and, you need to cut your energy consumption while simultaneously telling people, and by the way, we're going to be building out massive
exponentially.
Yeah, it makes
They
no
shut
sense.
off my power twice today. It was a beautiful day. There's no reason for it. That's going to come out of our end because I live in California where they cut off your water or they tell you that there are water shortages when there aren't. So they will absorb it and we will feel it. So, but it's not inevitable.
And get yourself some solar, some backup power. I mean, we live in kind of, I'd say 6 power outages a year is pretty normal, especially in winter. It can be every week in winter sometimes. So I'm kind of used to it. I think get yourself a little bit of solar, some emergency backup, and get used to leading a low energy lifestyle in terms of the stuff you need just to get by. Like if you can run a few of your, like if you've got everything connected to the centralized systems, it's probably a bad idea. So maybe get yourself a wood stove and, a few backup pieces of equipment.
All right. That's a lot of stuff covered for this edition. I don't know what else to say. I think we'll make an announcement soon. We'll hopefully decide on a day and time to do a Q&A with Mike's supporters, mine, and Monica's, and just for fun. And people can, of course, wherever you're watching or listening to this, type in the comments or message any one of us directly, individually, thoughts, feedback on our new monthly roundtable here. Any final thoughts, Mike and Monica?
No, I'm good. I've got a 2-hour podcast to record now on some of the topics we discussed, actually. So we're going to be talking about these past technology cycles of boom and bust and how they were used to actually build out infrastructure. So that sounds kind of boring, but it's quite a good history to get into. So that's my latest podcast. But besides that, you can find me on all the usual places: Parallel Systems Broadcast on Rumble, on YouTube, Parallel Mike Podcast. You can find that on my website, parallelmike.com. And yeah, I'm sure all my listeners know, but for anyone that's from Monica's or Hrvoje's show, yeah, you can check me out over there.
And I'll tell you, I started another new thing, Saturday Story Time. So I'm reading obscure books that aren't on the, Audible or whatever, doing some commentary. I'm doing it live on my videos, but it's on the podcast Saturday mornings. You can get my live show almost, I do something almost every weekday at 2:00 Pacific, 5:00 Eastern on my YouTube, Rumble, Rockfin, Twitter, at Monica Perez Show. And you can always listen to my show on your favorite podcasting platform, The Monica Perez Show.
And I'm over at Geopolitics and Empire.com, also Geopolitics and Empire.substack.com. And be seeing you.